The moment when everything falls apart is not the end. Let's begin with a moment no one warns you about. You wake up one day and something feels off. Nothing dramatic has happened, your job still exists. Your relationships are intact. Your daily life moves forward, but deep inside, there's a quiet unraveling. A sense of emptiness that no achievement can silence. A discomfort that lingers no matter how much you distract yourself. You might call it burnout, boredom, or even depression. But what if it's not a flaw in your psychology? What if it's a sign that the person you used to be is no longer enough for the life you were meant to live? Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he also warned that transformation never begins in light. It begins in collapse. Before the soul can rise, something in you must fall apart. That's where this story begins. Not with clarity, not with triumph, but with rupture, with confusion, with that subtle ache that tells you something is ending, even if you don't yet know what. And here's the paradox. While your mind scrambles for stability, the universe, calm and unhurried, has already set things in motion. Because what looks like a breakdown from the outside is often a breakthrough in disguise. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. Just like a forest fire clears the old to make space for new life, your inner terrain must sometimes burn. The ego will resist. It will scream that everything is falling apart. But your soul knows finally, something real is beginning. In this video, we'll dive into this hidden stage of transformation. We'll uncover why the universe tests you not with applause, but with silence. Why, before every shift in reality, you must first confront the version of yourself that was built only to survive. And why, if you're feeling lost right now, it may be the most sacred stage of your becoming. This isn't a motivational message. It's not spiritual fluff. It's a psychological reckoning. A truth few are willing to face, but one that changes everything once you do. Because when everything falls apart, it's not the end. It's the moment you finally stop pretending. It's the threshold where the false self dies and the true self begins to breathe. Are you ready to see what the universe sees in you? Then come closer. This journey isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. The universe doesn't destroy you. It strips you down. It always begins the same way. Life seems to be slipping through your fingers. People leave. Your body weakens. Money disappears. Things you once relied on suddenly fail. It feels like betrayal, like the universe is turning its back on you. But that's the illusion. The truth is far more subtle and far more intelligent. The universe isn't cruel. It's precise. When something big is about to emerge in your life, it doesn't hand you more, at least not at first. It takes away. It begins by stripping you of everything that cannot sustain the next chapter. Not to hurt you, but to reveal what's been hiding underneath your attachments. That's why, when you're about to evolve, your life feels like it's falling apart. Because the version of you that built your current reality must be dismantled before a new one can take shape. Carl Jung understood this process intimately. He saw that before the unconscious can bring forth a new form, it must first tear through the outdated mask. We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life, he wrote. And those disguises, your persona, your projections, your ego's armor, they're what gets stripped first. So when the universe starts taking, don't misread it as punishment. It's not revenge. It's not neglect. It's surgery. It removes what's rotting, even if you've grown attached to the pain. Because here's the secret. The pain you're feeling right now may not be from loss, but from detox. You're withdrawing from illusions, from false identities, from comfort that once protected you but now imprisons you. It hurts because the scaffolding is coming down. But if you look closely, you'll see that the core of you, the one thing that can never be taken, is still intact. Stronger even. Because that's what stripping does. It reveals. The universe doesn't destroy who you are. It removes who you're not. The question is, are you willing to let it? Or will you cling to the debris of your old life, mistaking familiarity for safety. This is where most people freeze. They try to glue the pieces back together, to fix what is breaking, to save the identity that's being dissolved. But what they don't see is that this dissolution is sacred. It's the dismantling of distortion. And in the ashes of that collapse lies the seed of coherence. What you're experiencing is not misfortune. It's alignment. Painful, yes. Confusing, often. But purposeful. The universe doesn't waste energy. If your life is falling apart, it's not by accident. It's because you asked for change. And change, real change, never begins with more. It begins with less. With letting go. With allowing the false to fall, so the true can rise. The only question is, will you resist the fire or walk through it? You must become before you can receive. There's a popular idea that life gives you what you ask for. But that's only half the truth. The universe doesn't reward requests. It rewards readiness. That's why so many people feel frustrated. They meditate. They pray. They visualize. And yet nothing changes. Not because they're unworthy, but because they haven't yet become someone who can carry what they claim to want. Carl Jung saw this with piercing clarity. He believed that you don't attract what you desire, you attract what you are. And what you are is not a list of dreams or affirmations. It's the frequency of your being, your essence, your unconscious patterns, your capacity to hold emotional weight without collapsing. So when you ask for more love, more purpose, more abundance, the universe doesn't give you a gift. It gives you a mirror. It reflects back the parts of you that must evolve in order to match the very thing you're asking for. And that's where the real work begins. Not in manifestation rituals, but in self-confrontation. In becoming someone who doesn't sabotage peace, who doesn't reject love, who doesn't crumble in uncertainty. Because let's be honest, how can you hold a meaningful relationship if your sense of worth still depends on being needed? How can you manage abundance if your nervous system is addicted to survival? How can you fulfill your purpose if you still fear your own voice? The truth is, the gap between who you are and what you want is not measured in time. It's measured in identity. That's why the universe delays certain gifts. It's not withholding them out of cruelty. It's protecting you from collapse. Giving you more before you're ready is not kindness. It's chaos. And this is where ego and soul diverge. The ego wants immediate results. It wants shortcuts. It wants comfort dressed up as achievement. But the soul plays the long game. It knows that transformation can't be rushed. That depth takes time. That strength is forged, not found. And so, the soul waits. Not passively, but patiently. And when the tests arrive, when old wounds get triggered, when your faith is stretched thin, when your dreams feel distant, it's not a rejection. It's a question. Are you becoming the kind of person who can hold this without breaking? The universe doesn't care what you say you want. It responds to who you've chosen to become. And becoming isn't glamorous. It's not something you post. It's not visible. It's silent. Invisible. Internal. But unmistakable. So the next time you wonder why something hasn't arrived yet, ask yourself not, why is this being delayed? But what part of me still needs to rise to meet it? Because until you become, nothing becomes real. Chaos is the soul's language of rebirth. There's a moment in every transformation where clarity vanishes and chaos takes the stage. It's the part no one prepares you for, the breakdown that arrives right after you think you've made progress. Just when you believe you've healed, the old pain returns in new disguises. Just when you found stability, everything shakes again. And the mind panics. It assumes failure, regression, a mistake. But the soul recognizes something deeper. Chaos is not a detour. It's the rite of passage. Carl Jung knew this. He understood that before the psyche can reorganize itself, it must first dissolve its outdated structures. In all chaos, he wrote, There is a cosmos in all disorder, a secret order. This is not poetic metaphor. It's psychological law. True growth is not linear. It spirals. It loops. It revisits. And each time, it peels another layer of illusion away. So when your life feels like it's unraveling, ask yourself what is being rewritten beneath the surface. What unconscious patterns are surfacing, not to torment you, but to be finally faced? Because chaos doesn't arrive to destroy, it arrives to reveal. Think about it. The betrayal that blindsided you. The illness that slowed you down. The sudden end to something you counted on. These moments seem random, even cruel. But they are not without intelligence. They are surgical. Designed not by fate's malice, but by the soul's refusal to be deceived any longer. The psyche knows what you're ready to face, even when the ego protests. And so it brings pressure. It shakes foundations. It removes certainty, not to punish, but to awaken. Because nothing exposes the truth like chaos. In calm, you can pretend. In comfort, you can hide. But in chaos, your raw essence comes forth. The masks fall. The wounds open. And in that exposure, you finally see yourself, not the version you curated, but the one you forgot. The one that aches to return. And it's in this moment, at your most unguarded, that something sacred begins. Rebirth is never gentle. It doesn't ask for permission. It disrupts, interrupts, disorients. But every disorientation is a gift because it breaks the trance. The trance of familiarity. The trance of identity. The trance of control. So instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Begin asking, what is this chaos trying to free me from? Because the storm doesn't come to drown you. It comes to strip away everything you thought you needed, so you can remember who you've always been. That's the paradox. The storm is not the threat. It's the invitation. Will you answer it? The ego's resistance is where suffering begins. Let's speak honestly. Change doesn't hurt. It's the resistance to change that breaks you. The fear, the clinging, the desperate attempt to hold on to a version of yourself that's quietly rotting from within. That's where suffering begins. The universe doesn't hurt you. The ego does. And it does so with the best of intentions. Because the ego was never evil. It was built to protect, to give you identity, to help you survive in a world that rarely makes space for authenticity. But survival isn't living. And the ego, once your ally, becomes your prison the moment you ask for something greater. Carl Jung observed this inner war with brutal precision. He saw the ego as necessary but ultimately limited, a structure that must break if the soul is to expand. And yet, most people don't want expansion. They want safety dressed as progress. They want evolution without loss, growth without discomfort, awakening without the death of who they've been. But that's not how transformation works. The ego doesn't want truth. It wants control. It wants to negotiate change without surrender. And when it senses the foundation shaking, it panics. It fights. It tells you lies. That you're failing. That you're weak. That going back to the familiar would be smarter. And if you're not awake to this voice, you'll believe it. You'll confuse its fear for wisdom. Its urgency for intuition. And slowly, you'll abandon your soul in favor of comfort. That's the quiet tragedy of modern life, people mistaking their ego's panic for their soul's guidance. But you can feel the difference. The soul speaks in stillness. It whispers clarity through the chaos. The ego, however, yells. It needs drama, validation, reassurance. And above all, it needs you to stay the same. Because if you change, it dies. And here lies the paradox. The part of you that got you here cannot take you further. The identity that protected you for years, the strong one, the nice one, the achiever, the peacemaker, that mask is too small for the life that's calling you now. And it knows it. So it tightens. It resists. It claws for control. And that resistance is what we call suffering. Not the situation, not the loss, but the refusal to let the old die. Because deep down, you know what needs to be released. You know what no longer fits. But knowing isn't enough. At some point, you must choose. Choose truth over comfort, coherence over control, growth over safety. Because the soul doesn't grow by adding more, it grows by shedding what no longer serves. And in that shedding, you will feel pain. But it is a clean pain. The pain of release, not repression. The pain of becoming. Will you lean into it? Or will you run? The silent pause between death and resurrection. There is a strange stillness that comes after the collapse. A silence so heavy it feels like a weight pressing against your chest. Not loud, not dramatic. Just still. Empty. And terrifying in its quiet. This is the space no one talks about, the pause between death and resurrection. The moment after the ego crumbles, but before something new has risen in its place. You're not who you were, but you're not yet who you're becoming. And in this space, the temptation to panic is overwhelming. You want clarity. You want motion. You want signs. But there is only silence. And silence is not a punishment. It's an invitation. Jung called this the numinous moment, a space where the conscious mind loses control and the unconscious takes the reins. Where the soul begins its work beneath the surface, reshaping you from the inside out. But because it doesn't announce itself with fanfare, you think nothing is happening. You call it depression, confusion, limbo. You feel lost, not realizing that being lost is the only way to be found again. In this stillness, something sacred is being prepared. Just as the soil must rest after being scorched before new life can emerge, so too must your spirit rest in the unknown. It's uncomfortable, yes. The mind wants to fix, to plan, to build again. But anything built too soon will be rooted in fear, not faith. This is not the time to create. It is the time to grieve, to feel the absence of who you were, to mourn the loss of identities you clung to for safety. The achiever, the lover, the victim, the strong one. They've died. And it's okay to miss them, even if they held you back. It's okay to feel empty. Emptiness is not failure. It is space. Space for something honest. Space for truth. Space for you. But only if you resist the urge to fill it with distractions. Most people don't stay here long. They run from the pause. They rush to rebuild the mask. But you're different. You're listening. You're not escaping. And that makes you dangerous to everything false. Because in this space, you don't just change. You awaken. You begin to see that who you thought you were was never the full story. That behind the striving and the stories was a presence untouched by chaos. A self not built, but remembered. So be still. Stay with the silence. Don't demand clarity. Let the pause work on you. Let the fire cool. Let the seed settle. Because what emerges from this pause won't be a polished version of the old you. It will be someone you've never met, someone you've always been. And when that emergence comes, it won't need to prove anything. It will simply breathe. Tests are mirrors, not punishments. It's easy to believe you're being tested by something outside yourself. That the universe is a harsh examiner, handing you trials to see if you'll fail. But that view is incomplete. It places you as a victim of something arbitrary, something distant. In truth, the universe is not testing you. It is revealing you. Every difficulty, every moment of tension, every painful trigger, it's not punishment. It's a mirror. And that mirror doesn't lie. Carl Jung knew this deeply. He understood that what we call fate is often just the reflection of our unconscious patterns projected outward. You meet the same types of people again and again. You find yourself in familiar conflicts. You fall into emotional spirals that feel too precise to be coincidence. That's not bad luck. That's feedback. That's the universe reflecting your inner world onto your external experience. So instead of asking, why is this happening to me? The better question is, what is this showing me about myself? Because once you realize that the universe is not against you, but for your awakening, you stop fighting the tests. You start reading them. And that's where power begins. But here's the thing. Mirrors are uncomfortable. They show you what you'd rather not see. Your jealousy. Your control issues. Your emotional dependency. Your need for validation. Your spiritual arrogance masked as wisdom. None of these are pleasant to confront. And that's why people reject the mirror. They blame. They project. They distract. Because looking inward requires courage. It's easier to say he betrayed me than to ask, why do I keep choosing people who can't hold me? Easier to say, this job drains me than to ask what part of me is addicted to proving my worth. But nothing changes until the reflection is owned. Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That's the essence of the mirror. What triggers you points to what's unresolved. What repeats in your life reveals what's unhealed. This is not a judgment. It's liberation. Because once you see the pattern, you have the power to shift it. Not by fixing the outside, but by transforming the inside. And here's the most radical truth. The moment you take full responsibility for your inner state, the outer tests lose their grip. They're no longer enemies. They become teachers. Not because they changed, but because you did. The universe doesn't change when you complain. It changes when you integrate. When you stop demanding proof and start embodying alignment. When you stop asking life to ease up and start asking yourself to rise. So the next time life feels like it's testing you, remember, it's not testing your strength. It's reflecting your readiness. And if it's showing you what still needs healing, that's not failure. That's a gift. Because you can only shift what you're willing to see. The fear of success and the trap of preparation. What if the thing holding you back isn't your fear of falling, but your fear of rising? It sounds paradoxical, even ridiculous. Who would fear their own success? Who would sabotage the very thing they've worked for, prayed for, dreamed of? And yet, if you look closer, you might find that the idea of finally becoming who you're meant to be terrifies you more than remaining stuck. Carl Jung believed the shadow isn't just the darkness we reject, it's also the brilliance we're too afraid to claim. We're not just hiding our wounds. We're hiding our potential. Because to shine means to be seen, to carry responsibility, to show up fully. And most of all, to shed the identity you used to survive. And that's where many people retreat, not in the fire of failure, but at the doorway of expansion. They say they're not ready. They say they're still preparing. They need more clarity, more healing, more time. And so they stay busy learning, reading, organizing, perfecting, doing everything except leaping. It's a loop, a trap, the illusion of progress without the risk of change. You call it preparation. But preparation has a deadline. Beyond that, it becomes avoidance. Because no amount of readiness will ever feel like enough when what you're facing is the unknown. Real readiness isn't complete before the leap. It awakens during the fall. That's why the mind resists. It wants guarantees. It wants assurance that the new chapter will be safe, predictable, understood. But true transformation doesn't offer guarantees. It demands trust. And the longer you wait for the perfect moment, the more you teach your nervous system that safety matters more than growth. That comfort is more important than truth. And so you shrink. Not because you're not capable, but because you've over-identified with the role of the seeker. You've built your identity around becoming, but you're terrified to arrive. Because arrival means action. It means embodiment. It means no more hiding behind potential. Jung warned about this kind of self-deception. the stories we craft to keep ourselves from stepping into power. We say we're humble. We say we're patient. But often, we're just scared. Scared of the attention. Scared of the responsibility. Scared of the identity we'll have to leave behind. But the truth is, no new reality will come until you're willing to lose the one you're clinging to. You can't carry your old self into your future. Not because that self was wrong, but because it was incomplete, built in survival, molded by fear. Now you're being asked to build from truth, from courage, from coherence. So ask yourself, are you preparing because you're aligning? Or because you're stalling? And if you're stalling, what would happen if you just step forward anyway? Not because you feel ready, but because you've decided you no longer want to live a half-life? Identity grief mourning who you used to be. There's a kind of grief no one warns you about. It's not the grief of losing someone else. It's the grief of losing the person you used to be. Of watching the image you've spent your entire life building begin to crumble. Not from outside attack, but from an inner knowing that whispers, this is no longer you. It happens slowly at first. The things you used to enjoy begin to feel hollow. The goals you once chased lose their meaning. The relationships you've maintained start to feel misaligned. And before you know it, you're standing in front of the mirror, looking at someone you no longer recognize, and yet someone you've always been trying to meet. Carl Jung called this the death of the persona, the carefully curated self we project into the world to gain approval, love, survival. And when that persona begins to die, it hurts. Even if it was never fully real. Even if it was built on trauma, adaptation, and the need to fit in. Because for a time, it worked. That identity saved you. It helped you belong. It kept you safe in rooms that didn't know how to hold your truth. But now, it's too small. It doesn't fit the expansion your soul is craving. And so it begins to dissolve. Quietly, relentlessly. And in its place, there's nothing yet. Just a vast space of not knowing. A raw, honest emptiness. And that emptiness is sacred. It's not depression. It's not failure. It's grief. Grief for all the versions of you that kept you alive when you didn't know how to be free. Grief for the illusions you had to let go of, the dreams that no longer serve you, the armor you wore so long it felt like skin. And like all grief, it demands presence. Not solutions. Not distractions. Presence. A willingness to sit with the ache of identity loss. A willingness to feel without rushing to fix. And when you do, something remarkable begins. In the ashes of the old self, a new self stirs, not imposed, not invented, but revealed. Not the best version of yourself, not the optimized self-help ideal, but the real you. The messy, soulful, grounded version that doesn't need to perform to be worthy. The one who breathes without trying to impress. But here's the truth. This new self doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives in whispers. It arrives in the quiet moment when you stop pretending. When you let the tears fall, not because something went wrong, but because you finally told the truth to yourself. You are not the masks you wore. You are not the stories you defended. You are what remains when everything else is surrendered. And that is more than enough. So grieve, yes. Mourn the loss of who you thought you were, but don't confuse that mourning with weakness. It is a rite of passage. It means you're evolving. Surrender is not defeat, it's coherence. We've been taught to associate surrender with weakness. To give in, to let go, to stop fighting it all sounds like losing. But in the deep work of transformation, surrender isn't failure. It's coherence. Coherence is when your thoughts, your actions, your emotions, and your energy all move in the same direction. It's when you stop saying one thing and doing another. When you stop asking for peace, but living in conflict. When you stop praying for love, but running from intimacy. Carl Jung knew that real change doesn't happen through effort alone. It happens through alignment. And alignment begins the moment you stop negotiating with your truth. That's what surrender really is. Not a passive collapse, not an emotional shutdown, but a radical yes to what is. A yes to what you feel. A yes to who you are. A yes to what life is clearly showing you, even if your mind wants to resist it. Surrender means saying, I no longer need to control this. I no longer need to make it look the way I imagined. I'm willing to trust that what's unfolding has meaning, even if I can't yet understand it. And that's terrifying for the ego. Because the ego wants guarantees. It wants timelines. It wants to know that if it lets go, it will land somewhere soft. But the soul doesn't need guarantees. It just needs space. And in surrender, that space opens. For the first time, you're not driven by the fear of missing out, or the need to prove yourself, or the desperate hunger to fix what's broken. You simply allow. You stop fighting your feelings. You stop editing your desires. You stop trying to make your life fit into someone else's mold. And in that stillness, you begin to hear your own voice again, not the voice conditioned by culture or childhood or trauma, but the voice beneath all that. The voice that simply knows. You realize that you don't need to force the next chapter. You just need to stop resisting the end of this one. And slowly, something shifts. Your body relaxes. Your breath deepens. Your choices become simpler, not because life got easier, but because you're no longer divided inside. You're no longer pulled in 5 directions. You're one. Whole. Coherent. That's the energy the universe responds to, not your desperation, not your effort. Because frequency doesn't lie. You attract not what you want, but what you are. And when who you are becomes consistent with what you long for, life doesn't resist you, it reflects you. So surrender. Not because you're giving up, but because you're finally ready to live without contradiction. Because you're no longer willing to abandon yourself for the illusion of control. Because this time, you're choosing truth over tension. And that choice, that subtle, quiet, irreversible choice, is what changes everything. Become the one who no longer waits. At some point, the waiting has to end. Not because the universe finally answered, but because you did. Because something inside you shifted not in fear, not in desperation, but in quiet certainty. You stopped asking if it was the right time. You stopped checking for signs. You stopped trying to control the outcome. You simply became the kind of person who no longer waits. And that changed everything. Because when you live from the energy of waiting, you send a message to life, I'm not ready. You delay your own becoming. You hand your power to a future that never arrives. But when you live from presence, from embodiment, you stop needing permission. You stop postponing your truth. You stop deferring your freedom to some ideal moment. You start choosing. And that's what the universe has been waiting for all along. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But once you see, you can't unsee. Once you know, you can't unknow. And once you truly align with the version of you that no longer hesitates, you collapse the distance between the life you dream of and the life you live. You no longer ask, when will it come? You begin to ask, how do I become? Because becoming isn't about chasing. It's about matching. It's about breathing like the person who already holds what you want. Thinking like them. Acting like them. Not in pretense, but in authenticity. Not to fake it, but to become it. And that requires a final leap. A moment where you stop collecting excuses disguised as logic. A moment where you stop defending your limitations. A moment where you step beyond the identity that has kept you safe and small. No more waiting to be less afraid. No more waiting to feel more confident. No more waiting for the world to agree with your truth. You are not here to live on pause. You are here to burn from the inside out with a fire only you can carry. So move not because you're certain, but because you're done negotiating your becoming. Move because it's time. Because the seed has cracked open and the soil is ready. Because this moment, the one you feared, the one you prayed for, the one you doubted, this moment is sacred. It is the meeting point between your readiness and your reality. Now the question is not, will the universe respond? It already has. The real question is, will you finally show up as the one who no longer waits, not to prove anything, not to force anything, but simply because the time to live as your fullest self is now?